Hi, I am sick and so I'm not there, but I am trying to do a lecture of sorts anyway on the internet. To start off with the articles we didn't get to last week, Shalinsky and Glasscock, Beth Conklin's article on the Warí of Brazil, and then also Dungsel Choi's article on Suttee, and I think you had all of those. If you didn't have Shalinsky and Glasscock, though, don't sweat it. The reason I had you read all of those depressing ones about killing babies, killing old people, burning widows, and eating the dead, those are because they all serve as rites of passage to transform people from an unacceptable form into an acceptable form. A lot of what Shalinsky and Glasscock focused on was this idea of liminal people, and how if you're dead, you're no longer liminal. You're easier to deal with. People know who you are. And so you can either transform somebody into a living identity or they can be killed off. That was the main point of that. And it also is interesting to see the variation that occurs cross-culturally. Another thing is the Warí article by Beth Conklin. If you are married into a family, you are responsible for eating the remains of your in-laws when they die. It's a very loving act. And from our perspective in the West, talk about something you can't get past in terms of ethnocentrism. Oh my gosh, here we are and they're eating their dead people. That's really horrible. But what's interesting is that it also is transformative, because you are allowing that dead person to become a part of you so their bodies don't decompose and these kinds of things. And I should point out that it is no longer a practice. Beth Conklin went there and interviewed people who used to practice it, but it's illegal now. And they actually bury their dead, which is sort of ironic. But anyway, the ritual was to transform the dead people into a spirit that can go ahead and live in that underwater heaven kind of thing they have, and come back occasionally in the form of a peccary, which is like a small furry pig. Peccaries travel in packs, and when people saw peccaries moving in packs in this part of Brazil, this was the only non-human animal that would travel in groups down there, so they figured these had to be people, just in another form. What they ended up doing was having, she comes up with this very interesting thing where you have a person die and you eat them so that when they're dead they can come back in the form of a peccary and you can eat them. So there's this repeating cycle of the dead feeding the living once this was there. They still do the peccary thing even though they bury the dead now. But a person wouldn't be able to, in the older times, get into this heaven without this ritual of being eaten. And it is seen as something very kind and good for the person who has died. And it's not a pleasant task, as you remember reading from Conklin. People cry, they get sick, it's horrifying, they dislike it, but it's an act of love. Interestingly, they also used to eat their enemies, but that was not the same loving way. That was meat right off the bone in a way that's probably reminiscent of a bucket of chicken at KFC. How's that for an image? Anyway, there was that. For Dungsel Choi's article, this is talking about the Indian practice of Suttee, also no longer practiced technically. The law says it's illegal, but it happens occasionally. And you read about how a widow has a very limited social role in the community if her husband has died, especially if she's a younger wife. There's really not much. She can't remarry. Her role is kind of off. Plus, remember we talked about karma being contagious when we were discussing Hinduism as a major world religion. She has proven through this loss of her husband that she had bad karma. And so she is, instead of contributing to society, she can only really take, and she can pollute other people. So how do you get good karma? Well, an act of selflessness, an act of bravery. You die with your husband and your spirit joins his. And then you get all these karma points. They're not really points, but you know what I mean. And you're able to go on and give good karma to your family. So this was the rationale behind it. Obviously the British got there and were like, what are you doing? Excuse me. Just in case you thought I was kidding about being sick. But the British didn't want them to continue it. Gandhi and people like that were opposed, and so it is an unusual practice. But your book discusses Rup Kanwar, who in the 80s, was a young widow, and she was like, okay, I don't care what you colonials say, this is the traditional practice, and I'm going to do it. And so she went ahead and did it and is sort of a cultural hero for doing that. So these examples of death are really showing the transformative power of certain rituals. And if they're lost, then you get an interesting question. If the Warí can't eat their dead, if Indian women no longer practice Suttee, and obviously in some cases they were forced, that part is discussed, because it's another mouth to feed, you get rid of Ma, then you don't have to worry about who's going to take care of her, which is problematic, but go back to, Shalinsky and Glasscock for an answer on that. Anyway, this transformation is the main reason that I had you read these. Alright, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to do a section ahead.